Beyond 3D.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Clint is there, Matt is here. Hopefully you're all out there and enjoying the week that you've just had. And sit back and relax. We're going to give you a really interesting show tonight. So, Clint, this week, how's it been for you?
It's been a great week.
Oh, good.
I sound like death, but...
No, you don't?
No, I feel like it. I know that much.
Okay, that might be, but no.
Hey, this week has been really, really interesting with the amount of information that's come over both our desks.
Yeah, quite a bit.
I've seen a lot this week about a dollar collapse on the 27th of September, allegedly.
Okay.
A GFC greater than the one back in the 20s.
Right.
Yeah. What economically? Now, you know more about that than I do.
All right, economically. The 20s collapse was a pretty big one. In my opinion, the 87 collapse was larger.
Okay. And you were around for that.
I was on the floor in New York. Now, I'm not familiar with all the numbers, but basically, the Dow Jones Industrial Average back in 1929 dropped a few points as far as a number was concerned, but from a percentage point, it was up 15 or something percent. I can look it up on Google real quick. But I was physically there trading in 87 when it happened, and the market dropped 22%.
How many people threw themselves out of windows?
Nobody.
Okay.
Most of the guys that were on the floor, we were very well positioned and did very, very well from that collapse. Now, the thing about it, and this is the thing most people don't know, and it's in my book, which is called The Path, A Market Maker's Guide to Spiritual Awakening, and it is available on Amazon. The Monday, the market went down 508 points, which was the 22% drop from 2,200 down to 1,700 on the Dow, as a number was concerned. The Tuesday was the big day. And what most people don't understand about that Tuesday was when we got to the floor, and we were all very, very happy because we had done very well the day prior, but we were ecstatic when we got to the floor on Tuesday because we were about to do 5 times better than we did on Monday. And the reason was because the Dow went from 2,200 to 1,700 on the Monday. The futures, which opened before the actual stock market opens, showed that the Dow Jones was going to drop another 700 points. From 1,700 back down to 1,000. If that had happened, so you're talking about losing another 50% of its value. If that had happened, it would have been extremely bad for the country and for the world. But certain individuals would have retired quite handily and quite happily from something like that happening. That was a very huge move. Now, from a spiritual standpoint, one of my teachers from Asia back in early 2000 talked about, I can say this now, he's been gone for a while now, talked about the fact that he was expecting an extremely bad market crash. And the way he described it was he saw blood running, the literal blood running in the streets. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which you have the bear symbol for the down market and the bull symbol for the up market, the bear was being chased down the street by rivers of blood, is the way he described it. So he was hoping that this wouldn't come to fruition, but he was expecting the Dow Jones, or the market in the United States, to lose half its value.
Okay.
So the 27th of September, we'll be watching with bated breath to see exactly what happens.
Now, allegedly, that's a particular date where the US economy gets looked at again, or has to be, the ledger has to be...
Balancing.
Thank you.
Consolidated annual financial reports come out. All of the companies must report. You see, when people look at the stock market, they don't get the full picture. Normally, they... Always remember this, guys, when it comes to finance. Anytime you hear the word budget, it can be manipulated. A budget is meaningless. You have to look at the actual numbers. The United States has a budget, and there's a budget deficit in the United States right now of about $19.5 trillion. Big deal. It's meaningless.
That's not real money anyway.
No, it's not. But the other thing is this. You have to look at budgetary deficits as opposed to equity holdings. And there is only one state in the Union of the United States right now that is in budget deficit and in also actual equity deficit, and that is the state of Mississippi.
Well, everybody at the moment, from Ron Paul to Peter Schiff to Gerald Celente, are all saying...
Jim Rogers probably the same.
Yeah, Jim Rogers as well. All saying September 27th, biggest GFC expected to occur in the history.
Well, you have a situation now where...
And that's because of the American bonds. American bonds are not being... what's the word I'm looking for?
The Chinese are the biggest buyers.
Chinese are the biggest buyers.
So if they're going to have a bond auction...
Yeah, well,
will these people step up to the plate?
Well, they can do that, but they're saying that even now, when shipping containers are being moved around the world, the American bond is no longer being accepted as a currency.
Yep.
So things are being held up, and things are stopping, and the flow is not conducive anymore.
That goes back to Richard Nixon taking the United States off the gold standard. It goes to the fact that they came up with the petrodollar, and the petrodollar has been used as far as pricing oil is concerned, and that is why the United States dollar, became the world's reserve currency over all of those years.
Even Russia just bought up some of China's debt. Now, having said that, China recently owns most of the gold in Fort Knox. So
good luck getting it.
Yeah, good luck getting it. So if China has most of America's gold, and Russia has just purchased some of China's debt, technically, therefore, does not Russia own part of America's debt?
It depends on what the Chinese want to use to pay off the debt that the Russians have bought from them. And it also, remember, in the United States, and we've always known this ever since a kid, possession is 9/10 of the law, as it is always stated. So if the gold is still in Fort Knox, which is questionable to begin with.
It's not there.
If it were, good luck getting it. There's a couple of things that happened in 1987 and that made me think that it wasn't there. But there was also a couple of things that happened during the so-called 9/11, which the anniversary is upon us again, once again, 15 years anniversary.
Now, we've got somebody we're going to interview about that in the next couple of weeks, aren't we?
We do. Rebecca Roth is the pseudonym, but she is a former flight attendant and has a lot of interesting information on exactly what was happening in and around the planes and what was happening in and around the control towers and what was going on with the stand-downs in military terms, because a lot of exercises were going on at the time. So she has a lot of information.
Inverted commas.
Inverted commas, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I segued there onto something totally different.
Yeah, but it's fascinating when you study the financial industry. I mean, everybody bags Wall Street. It all depends on where on Wall Street you worked now. And I'll say this now. I was going to wait till that show, but I will say this now. Every year they read off the names of the people who went down with those buildings. And they are revered. And in my opinion, some of them have every right to be revered, having to go that way. But I will say this, as a person who worked in Wall Street for a couple of decades, some of the people who went down with those buildings got exactly what they deserved.
I knew you were going to say that.
I am not kidding you. We're talking some of the most depraved individuals you could ever possibly imagine.
You are the type of individual who never wishes harm on anybody.
I didn't wish harm on them.
No, I know you didn't.
But some of them got what they deserved.
I know. In your opinion, what you're saying is some of them were so... what's the word I'm looking for?
Depraved.
Yeah, okay, depraved.
Narcissistic, psychopathic, sociopathic. Karma caught up with them.
Thank you.
The chickens came home to roost. And
not that you'd ever want to see anybody go down that way.
I wouldn't wish it on a dog.
No, you wouldn't.
Quite frankly.
I wouldn't wish it on a cat.
Some people... that too. Well, maybe. No, not a cat either. But no, it's amazing. But some of the people that were in those buildings were some of the nastiest individuals you could ever meet. And to the point of... my mother, God rest her, was one of these people that would never say a bad word about anyone. And the saying is, if you don't have anything good to say about somebody, say nothing.
That's why I don't talk very often.
Exactly. So now, one time a relative passed away. And my mother said, we have to go to this funeral. And she had a look on her face. And I said, why are you saying that? And she said, I don't say a bad thing about anybody, but let's put it this way. A lot of people will be at that funeral to make sure this person is dead.
That sounds like mine.
And so this is the thing. So it'll be interesting to talk to Rebecca about what happened in 9/11. But as far as finance is concerned, the 27th, a lot of the guys that you mentioned, Gerald Celente.
Gerald Celente lives and breathes American economy.
He is a forecaster. He's a researcher and an analyst, and that's his job. He also was on Wall Street. He also was politically motivated and worked in political parties and worked for political people. He has a lot of great information out there, and that information is pertinent. It is cogent. It is what is necessary, and it is, in a sense, futuristic. He predicts what's going to happen.
If Gerald Celente comes out and openly says, September 27th, we're going to see a GFC in the capacity the world's never seen before, he's really putting his name and his brand right out there.
And his reputation on the line.
reputation on the line.
Now, here's the thing about it. And this is what the problem is, and this can lead back to, what is it called? Skull Island, whatever the heck they called it way back in 1913. What was it?
Skull and Bones?
Not Skull and Bones.
Skull Island.
Okay, Woodrow Wilson, the jackass, he basically, on Christmas Eve in 1913, got the bankers together and they formed what is considered to be now the central banks. That evening, income tax came to the United States, and that evening the Federal Reserve came to the United States.
Jekyll.
Jekyll Island.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jekyll.
Skull Island is what? Skeletor and all that
Jekyll Island.
Yeah, so...
That was the Federal Reserve back in 1913.
Yeah, yep. So what you had then was you had a system that allowed certain entities... Now, the Federal Reserve is a private concern. It has nothing to do with federal whatsoever. It is a private bank. And they set policy. They set currency policy. They set the currencies and they set interest rate policy for the United States. Now, the interesting thing about this is you were talking about, like, let's say the Bank of New York's, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. On the board of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York is a person who is setting policy or helps set policy for the United States, interest rates, etc., that is not even a United States citizen, and runs his own private company, and but he sits on the board making this kind of policy. Janet Yellen, who is now the chair of the Federal Reserve, the problem that'll happen on the 27th is they are negative interest rates basically right now in the United States.
That's right.
And being that that is the case, how can you possibly hold a bond auction when you can't even offer anyone any kind of interest rate, which is why if you look at the corporate bonds right now, which is why everybody is plowing into corporate debt.
Well, how can you have a bond auction for an American bond that has no value in the eyes of the rest of the world?
It has value. The value is whatever you put in. If you buy a $1,000 bond, you'll get $1,000 back 10, 15, or 30 years from now. You will get no interest.
No. So that's just dead money.
It's dead money, but it's also negative interest because when the cost of actually maintaining your paperwork and everything like that, you're going to find you're going to actually be getting negative. So you might buy a $1,000 bond, but 10 years later, if it was a 10-year settlement, you might get back $995 after all of the fees are removed.
Wow.
So when that starts to happen worldwide, if you cannot finance your debt...
Nope.
But that plays into the hands of Donald Trump, who is talking about, hey, look, do it like a business. Cancel the damn debt.
He cancelled... Look, that man has ripped off... so many people.
Yes.
I wouldn't really hold his business ethics up on any kind of pedestal.
No, but what you're getting is if you get that person in the highest office in the land, allegedly...
It's not going to happen.
No, but if you get that happening, what will happen? He's not going to change his ways. He'll do the same thing. So he'll basically just wipe out, just say, well, we're not paying you.
Anyway, that was the news on the 27th of September, what's allegedly supposed to be happening according to all the world's leading economists.
Clint, I'll tell you this. They have said these kinds of things before.
I know.
They have done this before. Jim Rogers has always talked about it. Now, Jim Rogers, you have to take that with a grain of salt. I met Jim Rogers, actually, back in the 80s, but he was partners with George Soros. And according to the so-called pundits out there, George Soros is the real problem right now, and not just the United States, but in Europe and a lot of places around the world. He is manipulating a lot of things out there. So
when you have that kind of power and that kind of money, of course you can.
Well, yeah. Well, what's the other guy in Mexico's name? Carlos Slim, who bought the New York Times and things like that. The fact of the matter is, he's not even from Mexico. But it's just amazing the way these guys and the way they manipulate what's going on out there. Financially, there could be a problem, but the fact of the matter is the Federal Reserve at this point will do what they always do. They will just start another round of quantitative easing. And they can do, and if you want to see what it'll look like, just take a look at Japan. Japan has been going through this for the last 20 years.
When did they have their market collapse?
Back in the 80s.
83, was it?
I can't remember the exact year, but no, let me think. It was the late 80s, if I remember correctly, because Yeah, they went from, oh God, the market up there was screaming, and then it just collapsed thoroughly. It took their interest rates down to 0.5%. They have been there between 0% and 0.5% forever and a day now. You can't even look at it anymore and figure it out. But you also look at Japan and the economy. People are still working, people are still thriving, the economy is still growing. The problem in Japan has nothing to do with finance. The problem in Japan has everything to do with the fact that their population is going negative.
Radioactive isotopes.
That'll help too.
Beyond 3D.
Welcome back, guys, to Beyond 3D this week. Clint, I was about to say something, and I think I'll keep on talking about it.
Go for
radioactive isotopes.
Radioactive isotopes.
Oh my. Oh no, it's not a problem. It's the negative, the fact that the population is dying. They're not, in other words, they're not having enough children in order to keep the population afloat, in a sense.
Does that have a lot to do?
It'll come to me.
Does that have a lot to do with the amount of hours they work?
It does.
And the lifestyle that they have to keep going?
Yeah, what you see in Japan now is what you'll more than likely see in the United States in the next 15 to 20 years. Most apartment sizes in Japan, if you're in Tokyo, are boxes. Most apartments, if you have a one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, let's say a really nice one, would be about 1,100, 1,200 square feet. That same one-bedroom apartment in Tokyo would be about a third the size.
I've been into a standard Japanese apartment before, and I could literally put my hand on one side of the wall and my hand on the other side of the wall.
Exactly. And this is something that the people in the United States wouldn't really stand for, but they might not have a choice. So what's happening is there's a negative population growth in Japan. There is a negative population growth in a lot of places like that, but we will see what happens going down the pike. What I was trying to think about before will ultimately come back to me. I know it will, so I'm not going to worry about it too much.
I have a bad habit of doing that to you, don't I?
Oh, not really.
It's never
just, I was about to think of something. I said, it's gone. Oh, well. But so financially, we will see what happens. I don't think it'll be as bad as they make it out. I always hear this stuff, but there's always... I have spent a lot of time trying to figure out what governments can do, and I can guarantee you this. Every time you can think of 100 things they will come up with, they will think of the 101st thing, and that's what they will implement, and you'll go, oh, gosh, I missed it again.
Well, last week, Stephen Greer posted a little talk in regards to what the next global fake, well, he's calling it a fake, the next global fake disaster is going to be, and he's come out and actually said that the governments will be looking at using technology from things like Project Bluebeam and to hold fake alien abductions, which allegedly they've been doing for a long time now.
Didn't Stephen Greer say that if you see a ship or a so-called UAP or UFO and it's either a triangle shape or even a donut shape or even cigar shaped, it's basically man-made, and if you want to see a real one, it'll more than likely look like an orb of light. So as far as that's concerned, anything you see out there that's flying around that looks really funky, believe me, it's probably man-made.
Well, do you want to have a listen? I've just got a little clip.
Beautiful.
Here's Stephen Greer talking about pretty much what we need to do to be ready for a potential global fake alien attack, which he's talking about America's looking at leading and possibly the UN.
Beyond 3D.
This is going to get heavier and darker for a little bit until it gets better. Just bear with me. And, you know, I don't know if you know who this is. Liechtenstein is a big banking empire. And kind of they funded a lot of Adolf Hitler's work. And the crown prince is their king. So this is a man that I've met with and known for a number of years. I think this is dated 1994. And Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, the first time I called, I was asked to call the castle. His butler or someone picked up, and then he was immediately put on, and we talked, and he says, well, I don't want to talk on the phone too much, but we should meet. And these letters, this and you can go to the next one also, a month later or something. was from the castle, Vaduz, and this is the actual letters. He basically said to me, let's get together. And I think he was wanting me to come to Europe, and I said, well, I'm too busy. I'm working as a doctor. And then it ended up, and although it's not reflected in this letter, he came to New York and stayed at the Four Seasons hotel there in Central Park. And so he invited me over, and I had a meeting with him. But he says, from what I know of your assessment is correct about the group, this cabal, which is controlling the issue we discussed, UFO. I suspect they have very good reasons not to inform the public, and therefore I am highly skeptical about your chances of success. But he still wanted to meet. So I said, okay, let's meet. So this is where it's going to get into some shock and awe. I'm going 94 in July. I go up and meet with him at the Pierre Hotel, Four Seasons. And the reason he didn't think it could succeed is that he told me the ETs wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow disclosure to happen. I said, excuse me, we're making contact, and it's clear that, he said, well, let me tell you what happened. So he was involved with a lot of UN programs, and also with George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, and a man at the UN named Perez de Cuellar, who was the Secretary General at the time. I had done briefings with the predecessor, the one after Boutros Boutros-Ghali. And he said to me, the reason I, on the phone, told you that it wouldn't be allowed isn't that it wouldn't be allowed from the point of view of the government, but the aliens won't allow it. I said, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, since we've been talking, we've gone down to Mexico, had a craft come out. I said, they're obviously wanting to make contact if we do it in a peaceful way and not a military way. He says, well, this was attempted before you started your organization. I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, in November of 1989, in the fall of 1989, President Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Perez de Cuellar, and himself, this guy, and others met on a committee, very sensitive and classified, to organize basically what I did with the Disclosure Project, to announce that we weren't alone and end the secrecy. And he said what happened is that Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations, was coming back from a 3 a.m. late night planning session for this event, when he was abducted by aliens from his motorcade in Manhattan. And I said, oh, really? And he proceeded to tell me the gory details of what happened. So Perez de Cuellar was taken somehow out of the motorcade onto an ET craft, where he was threatened by the ETs and told, if you disclose this information, we will abduct every world leader involved, including the President of the United States. Now, this is from a person who was at the table for this planning session. To my ears, now to you. And I went, oh, come on, really? And he said, yeah, it blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House. Subsequently, I found out that up at Kennebunkport, there were all these UFOs zipping around when Bush was up there out on his cigarette boat. And they didn't realize they were ours. So now we're getting into false flag 101, up to and including being able to deceive members of Magic. And it took me a long time to get to the bottom of this mystery. Now, people like Bud Hopkins thought it was a real abduction case. And I looked into it, and I found out that if you go back to the Roswell event, there was a red-headed sergeant who was the badass guy who threatened to kill everyone, all those ranchers who saw this thing crash. His son became a part of Magic security, this renegade group, this splinter group, who was involved with abductions and stopping leaks within Magic itself. He then went and was in the security detail that night and set up the electronics for this electronic warfare abduction of aliens. It was all a hoax. It wasn't ET at all. It was 100% military ops. And so when, we're going to get into this in a moment, how these operate. And so Paris de Cuellar, of course, not knowing about that end of the classified world, and I would say Papa Bush neither, thought it was actually E.T. And it blew up, as I said, like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House. Gorbachev, they pulled the plug on the plans to do disclosure and end secrecy in 1989 at the end of the Cold War. And I think it's strange that in January of 90, 2 months later, it's when I had a contact event at my house in North Carolina with an ET and that said basically, pick up what you've dropped. Do this, what you left and behind as a teenager. Pick this up again. Someone's got to pick this up. But maybe that's a coincidence. But Paris de Cuellar thought that that was an actual alien abduction. And I said, well, with Your Highness, with all due respect, there are technologies that would facilitate this kind of deception. And the military term, so you know it, is a false INW, or a deceptive INW, indication and warning. And it's basically like the Gulf of Tonkin event in Vietnam. You basically exaggerate or hoax an event that then manipulates policymakers. So this was the ultimate takedown of official disclosure, which was about to happen in 1989. Got it? 26 years ago, November 1989. So here we are in 2015, and it took a lot to piece all this together, and I began to look into what the electronics were with this and what kind of technologies they might have. And one bit of insight that the prince had, he said, so he told me that the reason he was funding the abduction groups is that he was convinced that there was an existential threat from outer space. That's been the Sub Rosa plan since the 56. And that he wanted people to hate the aliens enough to pay the blood and treasure of World War III. And he also wanted it to be eschatological, where it would result in the end of the world so that Christ would return and the good folks would go up in a flying saucer, I guess, with Christ. Now, this is what he was telling me. I'm just listening. And I'm going, whoa, this is like, woohoo. And he was completely convinced that this is what needed to happen. This sort of end of the world, eschatology is the study of the end of the world event, and that's why he was putting so much money in and providing so much funding to Mack and David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins and all this. And he told me, he says, I'm going to stop funding John Mack because he's become too positive about contact, and I only want to fund people who are going to put things out there that scare people and make them hate the aliens. He said this. So I went, oh boy. Now this is connecting a dot that all of you better listen to very carefully. It's the last thing you learn today. And that is that there is an overarching agenda that was hatched in the 50s. Remember that psychological warfare document and its value? That was hatched between 53 and 56 to create the specter of a threat from outer space that does not exist. Wernher von Braun stated on his deathbed, and we have the testimony of his assistant, that and said, they will first have the Cold War, then we decided there would be nations of concern, then global terrorism. We have this testimony from before 9/11. Then that would be followed by threats from outer space. They'll start talking about asteroids and things of this sort, but the ultimate one they're going to play is the alien threat, and it's all a lie, and it's all a hoax. But in order for the lie to work, they have had to create a body of disinformation, false information, and frightening scenarios, and actual events that would be convincing to our policymakers like Reagan, convincing to the average person, and to the UFO public that consumes videos, entertainment consoles, movies, etc. And that has been the 50 to 60 year plan. Don't forget that no less a figure than Douglas MacArthur in his last address to the Congress said World War III will be interplanetary. So they have been wanting to provoke an interplanetary conflict for as long as I've been alive, and I'm no spring chicken. And, all right, so this gets into a huge problem of how people consume information and can be manipulated through fear. Because if you look at the roots of human warfare, the early days, and even today, it's people abducting a tribe's women, raping them, abusing them sexually, etc., and so on. This is all stuff that they are simulating and saying that the ETs are doing through these abduction scenarios. It is 100% being done by military special operations that are this paramilitary force. And this is the deep end of the pond. Now, when I discovered this back in 1994, now this is 21 years on, I was told by someone in the intelligence community, don't talk about that, because that's what's really dangerous for you. And it's also what will discredit you, and it will also cause them to hate you the most, because you're defanging their whole war plan. The next big war is not terrorism, it's interstellar. And if you expose that it's a hoax, it takes all the steam out of their plan. I said, yes, but if we don't, we're cooked, because there's no way you can have war that's interstellar and survive it. It'd be worse than mutual assured destruction, because the technologies are 1,000 times worse than a hydrogen bomb. So I said, look, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this, and the only way I know how to do it is put the sunlight in there and let people know what the truth is.
Beyond 3 D.
So a man came along, if you go to the next slide, and you probably have seen this, it's up on our website. When we first put it up, it had over 600,000 views. The next day, the intelligence community went in and said there were 6,000 views. By the way, if you believe the metrics on Google and YouTube, I have a bridge to sell you. It's all can be manipulated because it moves you down the search engines. So when this hit, within a couple of days, had 600,000 views. This man, William Pollock, his name is pronounced Pollock, was a man, very good man, who gave me an interview only to be released posthumously after he died. And not long, a few years ago, I got a letter from his wife, significant other, I guess, they weren't technically married, with a death certificate and a letter giving me permission, and he had passed away. And I have a lot of these, you know, and I honor my word about keeping a confidence. So what happened is that he gave me this interview, and in it, he talks about the development of RF radio frequency chip implants back in the 70s and 80s. And when he was developed, it was totally an accidental thing that happened. He was with a company that developed it. He then got called into the CIA, and they started doing special programs for the CIA to develop it. And at a certain point, Siemens in Silicon Valley manufactured 2 billion of them, with a B, of these RF chips. And the way they work, I mean, they can be so miniaturized, you could eat something with it, it has a radio free, and it can transmit not only where you are, but the really advanced ones have a neurophone capability to control thought and behavior. Very sinister stuff. So you can actually do a lot of psychological warfare with these RF frequency chips. Now that was the early stages in the 70s and 80s. Now you figure, 40 years later, they're more and more sophisticated. And as I've watched the whole UFO subculture sort of get involved with this whole fascination with abductions and implants, I went, yeah, but EG&G is on one of the plants is on the edge of the Area 51. They're the ones manufacturing the implants that you're taking out of these abduction victims. Absolutely. They're not coming from outer space. They don't need that. If you're interstellar, you're transdimensional. If you're transdimensional, you don't need an RF frequency plant chip to track anybody, because their technologies are way beyond that. I said, this is human. 100%. And you better wake up. And so Powlett gave us this interview, and it was one of a dozen data points that I began to accumulate. And then, not many years ago, I get a document, the next one, which is chilling. It's never been shown. It's from the Strategic Studies Institute, think tank, and it's dated 1995. And it was talking about all kinds of global security strategies. And, you know, you can look at it yourself. Cult programmed graduates, blah, 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 who will be expected to participate in contrived UFO abduction scenarios. Listen carefully. So, I loathe reading to people but this, I will. And number 2, create a global UFO cult, which will involve, this is what needs to be done in order to actuate this false flag operation, that will involve the abduction of citizens so as to foster an illusion that this Earth is facing an extraterrestrial invasion. UFO abductees of preference will have an experience in computer technologies, since that expertise will be required in future technocratic RMA scenarios. Use of experimental drugs, holographic projection capabilities, directed energy technologies, I'll get into that in a moment, induced auditory input. These are the neurophones I mentioned that Werner von Braun said the most dangerous thing is the neurophone, non-local things that can be done to make people think they're having an experience when they're not. Input, experimental aircraft, well, that's just a euphemism for man-made UFOs, and special effects costuming and stagecraft, among other things, will be used to persuade the abductees of the reality of their circumstances. Official denials regarding these events will employ reverse psychology to ensure that all such denials are taken as official confirmation of an imminent and or ongoing extraterrestrial invasion. This is the next page. UFO abductees will be persuaded to worship their anticipated ET conquerors in cult-enforced religious fashion. UFO cult networks will be controlled by U.S. intelligence to limit infiltration and ensure that dissidents do not disrupt UFO long-term agendas. Uncontrollable dissidents will be assassinated, preferably by directed energy means. Dissociative satanic cult graduates will handle all such executions, i.e., when not actively lending logical and theatrical support to UFO abduction operations. Number 3, directed energy surveillance and weapons technology of all types and caps will be used for purposes of spreading fear and confusion in the population at large under deniable circumstances, for eliminating persons deemed adversarial to U.S. national security interests, and for spotting, assessing, and manipulating potential recruits to the RMA cause. Neurocybernetics and other psychotechnologies will be used to sow confusion and hypochondria in the population. The symptoms and effects produced by these and other directed energy technologies will parallel the effects produced by various microbes, viruses, and chemical imbalances, thus compelling a large segment of society to seek medical intervention, which in turn will be a basis for their being used for medical experimentation under voluntary circumstances. Psychiatrists and psychologists will play an important role in these experiments, particularly where denying the efficacy of neurocybernetics psychotechnologies is concerned. Citizens who complain of hearing voices will be used as a basis for generously government-funded schizophrenic-related brain research, on and on and on. It goes on. Now, if you're not falling out of your chair yet, what I want to tell you is that all of that has come to pass and came to pass between the 1950s and the 1970s. A man that I worked with before his death had developed an electronic system in 1956 or 54, that would enable someone electronically to remote view anywhere, and could also affect, some of these have been called radionic psychotronic weapon systems. And they were developed decades ago. Now, how hard is it to deploy them? Not hard. They're not used every day. They're used enough to create a groundswell of conviction that there's an alien threat. So you take that capability, combine it with man-made UFOs, combine it with disinformation in general about the subject, and also certain chemicals, and you can launch an entire contagion of fear that's based on completely man-made false events. So this is the false flag event I wanted to warn you about. And people say, when is that going to happen? I said, it's happened already. It's already happened. The media, the film industry, any UFO conference you go to is going to be filled unwittingly, usually, not always unwittingly, but usually with information that is this kind of disinformation designed to create an us versus them dynamic of an alien threat. And the reason for it is that that is the only way to grow the military-industrial complex. You know, Leon Panetta, the CIA director and then Secretary of Defense, but when he was CIA director, said, you know, we're spending $110 billion a year chasing down 70 Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan. Ridiculous. In order to sustain the level of expenditures and grow the military-industrial intelligence laboratory financial complex, you got to have another enemy. And as terrible as the terrorism threat is, and it's real, it's nothing compared to what they could do, like in the movie Independence Day, where they stage an attack using man-made anti-gravs that look very ET, with this kind of technology, that there's a threat or an attack on Earth. So, heads up, Wernher von Braun on his deathbed warned that this would happen and it would be hoaxed. We've had so many people. I have met with one man, I can't get him to come forward, and then another, and then another, and then another, who spoke of, in the early days, they used, I know this sounds terrible, but he was a little guy, and he was so short, and they basically did like you would in a movie, suit and head and mat to make him look like an alien. And there would be military choppers nearby, but he would be on one of these flying discs, man-made, and go in and with a chemical canister and some electronics, abduct people. And he says, oh yeah, I was on an abduction squad, it was way back, I think in the 60s. They've gotten better, and I say better, and they've become more efficient because over the decades they've developed little creatures that look like an ET. They may look gray or like a reptile or this, and they kind of walk like this. They have this robotic, weird walk, and if you look at I saw the video that Stan Romanek had of the one that came into his house, that basically a film company bought up in Black Shell. Nobody has seen this. I was at his home. And the one that came into his house was exactly one of these so-called gray-like creatures. And the way it moved was this very robotic. It was so obvious that it was a biomachine. And if you go into the brain, it is physical. It has a biological component, but it's laced, the neural cortex is laced with integrated circuits. And it's completely under control of these military operatives. But he thought it was an alien. I said, well, it was an alien, but not an ET. So I used the word alien, which has a very xenophobic ring, to connote the man-made ones, and the ETs are the ones that are interstellar. The aliens that are man-made are ones that are completely under the control of these paramilitary operations, and the stagecraft, if you use the language of this Strategic Studies Institute document, is so good that it would fool anyone. The president, the CIA, you could abduct, and they did. They abducted Paris de Cuellar out of his limousine using this stuff, and he thought it was ET. And that's why they killed the initial plan to end secrecy at the end of the Cold War. Gorbachev was on board, Reagan was on board, Paris de Cuellar, head of the UN, Prince of Liechtenstein was involved, etc. and so on. Killed it. Now we're getting, this I know is where everyone's going, can this man have lost his mind? Every word I'm telling you is true. This is the heart of the secrecy. How do you convince people there's another species to hate?
Beyond 3 D.
What did you think of that, Matt?
Personally, if I were the head of the UN at that time and somebody came to me that was an alien-looking creature and said, I'm going to abduct all the world leaders, I'd say, go for it.
Yeah, but
That's what I would say.
I know that, but this is a document that Stephen Greer is talking about.
Yeah, I know.
And somebody that's spoken to him about that this kind of staged abduction that frequently occurs.
Yeah. It does scare people, and it will keep people in line, so to speak, because what they are using is technologies that most human beings have not seen yet. And so, therefore, they can get away with things along those lines. But it'll be interesting, to say the least. There was another point I could have come up with at that point, but it's gone again.
Have you had dinner tonight?
No.
No, you got a bit of brain fade happening.
Yeah,
there.
I got to start taking some of Alex Jones's stuff.
No, don't do that. I like working with you. I don't want to make you disappear.
Some of those nutraceuticals. No, it's a fascinating study. Stephen Greer has some really interesting documentation that he has gotten from credible sources, and
incredible sources.
And incredible sources, especially along the lines of Marilyn Monroe and what actually happened with her. And fascinating to listen to, and it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. That's what I was going to think about. That's what I was thinking about before you mentioned that, and all of a sudden I read a story this past week about the fact that the Chinese were livid with the United States of America because of the SpaceX rocket being blown up on the launch pad, which they blamed on the United States doing it purposely, because if this satellite had been launched, it would have given a Chinese company a deal. They were going to do a deal with an Israeli company that was launching this satellite. And
this is getting too confusing already.
Yeah, but intrigue, political intrigue. And all of a sudden, so everybody, if you don't know, the SpaceX and Florida was about to launch a satellite. You can look at it. There's YouTube videos of it. And the thing blew up on the launch pad. Some people have come in and stated that they see something flying by in the frames. And as it flies by, this thing blows up. Some people say this thing could be a bird. Some people say it was too fast to be a bird, and it was some kind of drone technology that the United States used to send a beam, a particle beam, a laser-type weapon, and blow the thing up on the launch pad.
Whatever it was that did it, it was moving incredibly fast through that frame.
Yeah, it did move fast through the frame. See if we can find a link in that. We can put that up on the Facebook page.
Yeah, I'll do it now.
But it was fascinating. So a lot of these things are going on now. They said because of this, there was no red carpet when Air Force One landed to go to the G20 summit when it landed in China. A few of the United States officials were chastised by Chinese officials. So there's a lot of diplomatic skullduggery afoot when it comes to what's going on right now.
And poor Elon Musk just wanted to put his rocket up in the sky.
Yeah, basically.
That's all he wanted to do.
That's all he wanted to do? Yeah, well, obviously other people had other ideas, other agendas, other ideas. They're out there. One other thing I was hearing this week. Now, last week I mentioned the fact that the Juno Probe is up around Jupiter, but I hadn't heard anything yet. But then all of a sudden...
Nice photo.
Yeah. And everybody's talking about, oh, you don't see the bands. But if you look down the side of the photo, you will still see those bands there. So it's taken from a pole. And then they did an infrared photo or video of the southern pole region and the aurora that was down there, like they have on Earth at the poles. And they had the sound recording of what it sounded like around it. It was absolutely fascinating to listen to. It sounded like, one of these, not white noise or a pink noise kind of meditative kind of sound that was actually emanating from the planet. So at least they put some information out about it. But then I started reading more into this, and you'll know about this, Clint, Nabiru.
Planet X, Wormwood, the Destroyer.
Now, some people are saying, I wondered what this Juno Probe is doing. Some people are actually saying that Nabiru is between Mars and Jupiter right now.
Okay.
Now, if that is there, allegedly. Now, if that is the case, what would really be an interesting theory is the fact that...
Stop. They're out there waiting? They're out there looking.
They're out there looking.
And waiting for it to pass by. Yeah.
They want to get a good look at the daggone thing.
Because, we won't make a statement saying we're sending a probe up to watch an incoming planet destroyer.
Kind of, sort of. So I thought that was very interesting. And the other thing that I was looking at this week that it was interesting, a couple of things actually. I'll get into this one first, and I'll have to put some pictures up on our Facebook page about it. There was a very, very large, and Linda Moulton Howe did an investigation on this. There was a very large crop circle that formed.
Okay, I didn't know about this.
In August in England, and this thing was 350 feet across, so it was quite large. And it had a very interesting symbol.
Hang on, what country?
The crop circle formed in England.
Okay, England,
in southern England.
Yep.
And very small town in a wheat field, about a town of 120 people, but there is a community farm, and a lot of things are going on there. And Linda Moulton Howe did a report on this, but the interesting thing was she said the crop circle, it was almost like a 3-leaf clover kind of design, but they looked like marijuana leaves. And on the outside of it, there was some very interesting symbols. And she was doing an investigation on the symbols and things like that. See if you can bring it up.
Let me look for it while we're chatting.
And so this was being talked about. So this led, when you start investigating these things, and most people that are journalists will know this, one thing leads to another thing, which leads to another thing. And usually the journey is more interesting than the final version of things. Looking at this crop circle and the way it was designed, it was a brilliant little design that they did. And there were 20 symbols around the outside of it. I believe it was formed on the 6th or the 12th of August, from what I remember. And when you look at it...
I found it.
Oh, very good.
Wow.
So we'll put it up on the Facebook page, guys. When you look at it, it's a very interesting...
I'll put it up now.
Cool. It's really, really interesting when you look at this thing, but the fact of the matter is nobody knew what the symbols on the outside of the circle were. And so she did her investigation, and the investigation led to, of all places, Oregon in the United States.
Whoa. Whoa, hang on a minute. Hang on, you got my attention. A crop circle in England had symbols around the outside that investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe traced back to Oregon.
In the United States.
In the United States.
And this was supposed... Now, some people are saying that this is not... An orb didn't come down and make this. This was man-made. Well, there could be... So what she's basically saying, it's a little bit of both. Because when she did the investigation of that symbol you're looking at there, it led to a company. And this company makes glass. And the company, as Linda Moulton Howe stated in her report, the company is called Mothership Glass.
So are you talking about that this was a promo?
This is the thing they can't find out.
Okay.
So now you look at then she said spell out mothership, and it is 10 letters. And so the 20 there on both sides of that can represent mothership being written twice. Then she went into and she talked to a few people that had done some work for this company, and it's really interesting. They only make maybe between 25 and 50 pieces of artwork per year. A lot of the work that they do, it's around marijuana and people that do, bongs and smoking and things like that. A lot of the pieces sell for between $5,000 and $15,000.
We're talking like water pipes.
Water pipes and things like that.
Okay.
And they do, but they say what they do is they actually have, in inverted commas again, alien technology that allows them to do certain manipulations of sand and glass that they make these things from.
Okay.
And so it's a very interesting tie-in, whether or not they made that or not. But what I also have, and we can put this up, I'll turn this so Clint can see it on our monitor here, but that's what some of the work that they do looks like.
Ooh. I don't even know how to describe what I'm looking at.
It's amazing, some of the things that people can come up with. But you figure this, these people make...
What the...
And now, what happens is there are certain art galleries, and they have an auction, and they will send out invitation only. And this auction will happen, let's say in San Francisco, as Linda Moulton Howe talked about. And the auctions are always held around 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And
sounds very clandestine.
yes, it does, doesn't it? But
this sounds like a really great marketing ploy.
it does, doesn't it?
To create a false intrinsic value on a limited product that they create.
Exactly.
To boost up the price of it and therefore make it more valuable than it actually really is. Because at the end of the day, this is just sand and glass.
This is the whole thing. Now, even if they have some kind of otherworldly laser and they're manipulating it, good for you. But the fact of the matter is, everything tied together. And when they talked to the person who owned the farm, who said she was conveniently on vacation at the time that this crop circle appeared, she basically hung up the phone on Linda Moulton Howe, said the people are trying to manipulate what she wants to actually say, and wouldn't talk to her. Jaime Muson from Mexico went up there because she said she would talk to him, and when he got there, she refused to talk to him as well. So the whole thing was a very fascinating thing, but this crop circle came up. It was huge, but there is a tie to, it could be a really massive marketing ploy, but in spite of that fact, they're still trying to figure out how it was made.
It is one of the most intricate, detailed, alleged crop circles I've ever seen. I don't even know how to begin to explain. Look, everyone, just go to the Facebook page and have a look at the image. Picture tells 1,000 words.
Absolutely, but thanks to Linda Moulton Howe for doing that investigative work, because it's really interesting when you get the backstory behind some of these things. Fascinating stuff. The other thing going on, as far as I can see, is alternative media in the United States is, in my opinion, being taken in by the elite.
Well, can they knock on our door? Because the only alternative media here in Australia is you and I.
There you go. They are being taken in by the elitists, and they are starting to do the thing that you don't want to do as any kind of journalist or anything putting information out. They've taken sides.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't do that. And when you take sides, your credibility, at least in my opinion, is out the window.
No.
You have to remain neutral.
I mean, you and I have opinions on things, but we don't ever...
No, you basically say, look, Bilderberg chose Clinton, this is what's going to happen. That's fine.
Bilderberg would
That's
never
what it
choose
is.
me.
That's what it is. It's the whole point. But when all of a sudden you sell your principles out the window and choose a party and choose a candidate and say, this is the way it's got to be to save this, you're just playing a game.
Alex Jones.
Yeah, he did it.
Alex Jones did it, didn't he? You were telling me about that earlier.
Yeah, I was very disappointed in the fact that he chose sides. I mean, I can understand you don't like Hillary Clinton. A lot of people don't. I can understand that you didn't like George Bush. I can understand that you don't like Obama. You don't have to like any of them. They're politicians and they're lawyers on top of that. You don't have to like them, but come on.
About 2 years ago, Alex Jones was really pushing Ron Paul. Now, that was because that was where his political agenda was aligned to.
Libertarians and that kind of thing.
Libertarians and that, but now he's gotten into bed with Trump.
Yeah.
That's not cool.
No. Not by any stretch of the imagination. So he basically said Ron Paul was no good, or his son Rand, also, the senator from Kentucky, was no good because they were too, Republican. But now that Trump is in there and is so-called, and they say that he's taken it over from and is going to change it, which is an absolute fallacy. They've gotten into bed with this guy, and I just think it's the wrong move. And what they basically now find themselves doing is defending all of his actions. And I noticed that it's not just going on with that, it's going on with a lot of things these days.
Trump's had the same haircut since he was 10. He's not changing anything.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, and nothing's going to change. And if anybody out there actually believes that one of those two parties or a single human being is going to change what is going on, it doesn't work that way. It has to come from another source. And this is the thing. I think a lot of people, I was listening to another person, I've got to get him, Dick Gregory.
You've been telling me about Dick Gregory for a while.
And he was even talking about the fact that in spite of the fact that he went through what he went through, he was in Mississippi in the 1960s. He was when nobody else, when Eisenhower and Kennedy actually stopped welfare and all these kinds of things coming into the areas when the civil rights movement was going on. Dick Gregory was flying planes in with food and supplies for people, even back then. And he was saying about the fact that when the balloon goes up and stuff starts to go down, even he will not be able to escape it because he was part of the problem. Even though he tried to help, he said, look, anytime you go out and you buy a subsidized piece of fruit in the United States, you are supporting what these guys are doing. You have to really look at the way you do things. So it's been a fascinating week politically. It's been a fascinating week as far as what's going on in space. It's been a fascinating week with technologies and satellites being blown up on the launch pad. It's been intriguing insofar as what's going on politically and diplomatically between Russia, the United States, and China. It's been really interesting because this morning we heard about the fact that John Kerry announced that Russia and the United States and Syria have agreed to a ceasefire. And so hopefully that can hold and people can get back to what's going on, which is basically living a life and trying to help each other instead of hurt each other constantly.
That's fantastic.
I think so. I hope it sticks. I hope it holds. That's what's supposed to be going on out there, not this other craziness. And so it's been a fun-filled week. It's great to be able to watch this stuff, to be alive on the planet while this stuff is happening. I mean, I just thought about the fact that a lot of people that are talking about Hillary and Bill Clinton, a lot of the people that are looking at the elections now weren't alive when Bill Clinton was first president. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, I find that hard to fathom, but because I was around, but still.
If they were, they would have been potential dates.
Yeah, both men and women. So, yeah, it's very, very fascinating what's going on worldwide, but we'll just keep on listening, keep on watching, keep on presenting the information to you guys, and it's up to you to decide what resonates within you and what is really helping you go forward. But there's a lot going on out there, and another topic we'll have to get into probably next week is what is going on with the Giants.
Oh,
and not the San Francisco Giants.
No, you're talking Nephilim.
Yes, I am.
You're talking Nephilim. You really like making work for me, don't you?
Well, I'm going to help you with this. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to get a lot of different things going because I've heard a few interesting stories of late, and I have to make a phone call to San Diego to verify something, so that's what I'm going to do.
Okay, I've got a lot of stuff on that I have parked over the last couple of months, waiting for this kind of a opportunity to come up. So I'll dig some of that stuff up and get ready too.
Yeah, it's not just the Giants, it's the long neck ones, it's the whole bit. Yeah.
After the back of this next break, I've got something I want to bring up with you.
Cool.
Beyond 3D.
Welcome back this week, everyone, to another episode of Beyond 3D. Matt.
Yes.
Last year.
Ah, yes.
Last year, we interviewed Duncan Rhodes from Nexus Magazine.
We did.
At the very start of the year. Mm-hmm. Duncan brought up... Well, actually, I asked Duncan a question in regards to what was... I think from memory, I asked him what was a story that's come across his desk that might have kept him awake at night. Do you remember?
Right, yes.
Do you remember the Loosh story?
I do, actually, yes.
Okay. I'm just going to play a very, very quick excerpt of that now, just so people know what it is that we're talking about. Hang on a sec.
I do get access to information which it doesn't get out there on the internet.
What is one topic that's kept you awake at night? I mean, I'm sure plenty of things have crossed over your desk over the years. What's that one story, that one piece of information?
Well, there's none stop me sleeping in terms of worry and fear. Okay, the biggest one for me probably would be the what people call the Loosh story, Loosh, which probably kept me awake more nights and longer. And for me, this story explains the reason why we're here, and it's very controversial. Now, the context is this. Robert Monroe had written the first book, Journeys Out of the Body. He'd set up an institute, and by this stage he's got a lot of students who he can put in individual rooms. Literally, they get out of their bodies, meet in a central location and go off. And a lot of it is mapping and charting what they call layers of consciousness and densities of consciousness that surround the planet. And in their journeys, they find different types of entities and beings inhabit different layers with different outlooks on life. Generally speaking, they find that when a person dies, when their soul leaves their body, that soul goes to one of several different layers where they rest, assess, reanalyze, and then they come back down and get into another body. We call that reincarnation. Eventually, when the soul comes out and goes to the farthest layer once or twice or a few times, there's a choice given about whether you go back at all or whether you move on and you've gotten everything out of why you came to Earth. So the underlying context that Monroe picked up is that we are immortal beings of spirit who've come to planet Earth for our own reasons of growth and evolution on a personal, soul, spiritual level. Now, those immortal beings of spirit come from many diverse and different places which are outside of what we'd call the physical universe. And so when he's out of body with some of his students, he's interacting with people, sometimes who are visiting the Earth in a non-physical sense, but don't wish to have a physical lifetime down here. So there's some very interesting conversations. Now, one particular conversation was, and this is a remarkable context because he's on one of the furthest most layers of energy frequency above the Earth in his out-of-body state, and he's talking to a couple of beings who have literally arrived on the equivalent of a cruise ship. And you know how a cruise ship will go around the Mediterranean, and you'll stop at Greece and you'll look at ancient Greek temples, etc. This cruise ship, one of the featured stops of this cruise ship was planet Earth in the space-time continuum. So in other words, it's like they pull into the whole 3D universe to start with, and in the whole of the 3D universe, one of the top tourist attractions is planet Earth. And so there was a remarkable lot of conversations going on. Now, when these two guys got off the cruise ship and the cruise ship sort of parked there, one of these spirits decided that he wanted to have a go at being a human. And he found the person in charge, and the person in charge says, well, you've got to put your agreement, you've got to choose, you've got to agree to these conditions. And the conditions were very interesting in themselves. Number one, you had to choose to forget who you were while you're a human. And you have to agree to subject yourselves to the beliefs and laws of the culture of the time period. And the entry director basically said, okay, you've got permission as long as you agree to this. And of course, the poor spirit going into this body had no idea, had no comprehension of what it meant to forget who you are. That's an interesting thing to start with. So anyway, this guy jumps into the entry portal, zips off, disappears, and presumably is born somewhere and is having a lifetime. So meanwhile, Robert Monroe is standing there chatting away to the other tourist, the one who decided he didn't want to go down and have a body. And they're chatting away a bit, and after a few sentences, the tourist that didn't go in to have a human existence, he sort of said, well, shouldn't he be back by now? And so they go looking for him, basically, and they find that he was born as a baby into some absolute crap lifetime. Raised as a woman, ended up a woman in some African tribal thing. She was gang raped by a drunken husband and all his mates. Half her children died. Always hungry, miserable existence. But when he had died, he hadn't quite remembered who he was and what was happening, and he was sort of still loitering around the body, and they found him and said, come on, time to get back in the cruise ship and go. And he looked at them, and then he realised, who he was and what he was doing there, and he just lit up and he said, oh, man, he said, that was the most amazing experience I've ever had. He said, I can't believe it. And he said, I had these things called emotions, and he started babbling about what it was like to have a lifetime. And, of course, the other tourist had no concept about what he was talking about, but Robert Monroe did. And they could not get him back on the boat. He wanted another lifetime, and then another one, and then another one. And then each time it got to the point where they couldn't make him remember who he was and why he was there. And Robert Monroe then explained to the first tourist, look, I've noticed this happen. They spiral down they spiral down into a total forgetfulness state. They have lots of lifetimes, not knowing who they are, totally believing in the bullshit around them of the era and the time. And eventually something nudges them, and they start, waking up a bit more, and coming out. Now, during all these conversations, during one of the lifetimes where they were waiting like an extra 5 minutes for the guy to have his lifetime, Robert Monroe said, well, he says, so you're from this other dimension and you're visiting Earth. He said, the planet Earth, of all the physical universe, planet Earth is the real attraction. And the guy's basically going, yeah. And Robert says, well, what does it say in the brochure? What does it say in your travel brochure about planet Earth? and they gave him, or they showed him the brochure to read. And what Robert Monroe read, what was in that brochure about planet Earth, absolutely shocked him to his core. He basically just did nothing for weeks. It absolutely overturned his faith and belief in everything. All his out-of-body experiences, all the weird and wonderful creatures and conversations he'd had, you'd think he'd be a bit immune, a bit expansive in his comprehension of what's going on. But this absolutely shocked him to his core. And what was in that brochure was the Loosh story. So that's just the lead-up to the Loosh story.
Wow.
Do you want, me to continue into the Loosh story?
Yes, Duncan, you can't leave,
Okay,
can't leave it
hanging like that. No way.
God. So the Loosh story is this, and in this context, you don't just read a brochure, you absorb and feel and understand and live the information. So it's an experiential absorption of information rather than just getting it through the eyeballs, going through the brain and then sort of rattling around. But the story was this. Once upon a time, a long time ago, a lot of beings got together and they wanted to come up with a manufacturing method to obtain a resource which they all prized. The resource they all prized in their reality is called Loosh, L-O-O-S-H. It existed naturally here and there, but these guys got together and they said, let's come up with some way of having this manufactured. Let's see if we can, manufacture this stuff. It'd be like the equivalent of someone turning, I guess, dirt into gold here on planet Earth. Not so much a greed issue. It was a resource, an energy, a drug. It's like a substance to them on a level we can't really comprehend. But the bottom line is we can comprehend it's a valued resource. Now, they looked around in the cosmos and found that this Loosh was being produced as a result of some interactions between different carbon and hydrogen and oxygen life forms, types of, I guess, bacteria. To cut a long story short, they set upon finding a place, they terraformed a planet, and they started experimenting with these different life forms. They found that they got some of this Loosh substance upon the termination or the extinction of these life forms. So they periodically upgraded the life forms into multicellular, complex life forms. They learned that conflict caused more of this Loosh. And basically what you read in the brochure was the history of planet Earth from the terraforming parts at the beginning, but particularly the rise and fall of each of the different types of life form that existed on the Earth, the mass extinctions, and then leading up to their final creation. They found the ultimate life form, which produced this Loosh substance. To cut a long story short, was what we call the first humans. The progression was very interesting. They started off with literally cellular, bacteria level stuff. And when you read the Loosh story, and then you go back through the history books and you look at the mass extinctions and the type of life forms, which I've done, you see prokaryotes going into eukaryotes. Now you're talking about a cellular life form with no nucleus for a billion years, and then suddenly they're all gone, and we've got a new life form with cell nuclei and going off into all these different branches. So in some ways it negates the whole theory of evolution where one species turned into another. But it says that you had an intelligent bunch of beings who literally created these life forms.
Beyond 3 D.
Okay, so that was Duncan Rhodes talking about Loosh. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that story?
I remember that, yes.
Okay.
It's
kind of look, when you're really, really close to that kind of information, like, I've just presented that to somebody tonight who's never heard that for the first time. They've probably heard that and gone, what an absolute crock. Mm-hmm. Okay, very tinfoil hat. Mm-hmm. But step back a little bit, and then step back a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Last week, I listened to an interview with David Wilcock on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church. Mm-hmm. Was it Jimmy Church?
If it's Fade to Black, it's Jimmy Church,
no, it might have been Coast to Coast. No, actually it was Coast to Coast.
Was it?
It was Coast to Coast.
Okay.
And David Wilcock, guess what he brings up?
Loosh.
Loosh.
Okay.
Have a listen.
This battle is very real, and the negative has every incentive to try to keep us enslaved because They actually feed on that. We generate an energy that they use for sustenance. They call it Loosh.
Loosh?
Yep, and it's based on Lucifer. That's where it comes from.
Boy.
So Loosh is what we generate when we have anger, when we have fear, when we have jealousy, possessiveness, competitiveness, stress, pain, depression. All those things that we think of as just stuff that we run into every day, they vitally require it for their survival.
Well, there's two people who have nothing to do with each other, who move in two totally different circles on two different continents on the Earth, both bringing up the same topic.
Duncan said it first.
Duncan said it first. He's beating his chest up there in Queensland right now.
That's the way. Interesting that that's coming up. I also this week watched a video. I think it was from Dr. J's thing, which is Contact in the Desert.
Yep.
And David Wilcock was on that as well. And Corey Good was sitting in the background. And they were talking about different topics along those lines as well. What's going on with, what does he call it? The Sphere Being Alliance or something like that.
That's Corey Good. Yep.
Yeah, what they're actually talking about.
The Blue Avians?
The Blue Avians, yeah. Yes. And it was very interesting again. They're basically getting ready for something big to happen. I don't know if it's going to be on the 27th of September, but...
well, they've been alluding to that. Something big. I'm not too sure what the something big is supposed to be.
Well, here's what I have heard, Clint, that's really interesting. You're talking about this Loosh story. You're talking about, if you see what's going on in the world, what is building up that negative energy, or that fear energy that the beings can feed on. You have ISIS, ISIL, whatever they want to call themselves this week. You have countries that have now so sick and tired of Islam and what they're allegedly doing to people that countries like Norway, Angola have banned Islam as a religion in their countries now. They are starting to deport people from these countries. This is all negative energy, and it's being fed. So if another big thing happens, now the other thing that's interesting is they talk about the fact that a lot of people that are so-called billionaires and millionaires, what are they all doing? They're all moving to the southern end of the equator. They're all coming down here.
Steve from Soul to Soul mentioned that the other week, didn't he?
They're coming down here. New Zealand, they're coming to Australia, they're coming anywhere in the southern hemisphere. Why?
Because from what I've seen, the projected way in which the planet is allegedly meant to tilt and rotate with a pole shift. Where we are in Melbourne pretty much gets moved up to where Papua New Guinea is. So Australia ends up, the equator ends up on this computer simulation running through Australia. So we become the new tropics. Yeah.
Interesting.
Allegedly.
Interesting.
And that's all to do with the approaching Nabiru, creating that pole shift.
Well, the other thing that was supposedly happening, according to Corey Good, and what I heard in this video, was the fact that some of the Alpha Draconi were trying to get off of planet because of this about to happen, and they are allegedly in Antarctica.
Interviews galore this week I've looked at about Hollow Earth and the fact that the humanity, we're not the original inhabitants of this planet, allegedly.
All right, all you Star Trek fans out there, here's what you can do.
Pens down. Here we go. Here we go.
They talk about Alpha Draconi and all of these different things. They talk about insectoids. They talk about reptilians and all of this stuff. Look at the series Star Trek Enterprise that Scott Bakula was Captain Archer.
Yes.
And take a look at, I think it was season 2 or season 3, what they went through.
Hollywood imitates life all the time.
They went through a thing called the Xindi. And the Xindi had 4 different creatures. They had Xindi, there was an underwater one, there was an insectoid, there was a reptilian, and there was a humanoid.
Yep.
Each of those were represented.
Yep.
What they're now stating is you have the Alpha Draconi, which are the reptilian kind. They have the insectoid manta beings.
The mantids.
You have us, the so-called, and you had
Blue
the
Avians.
underwater, the underwater ones that look like manatees and all those kinds of things.
I have no idea.
Interesting how art imitates life, according to some. I find it fascinating because when I heard this interview and he started talking about that, I said, wait a minute, they did that on Star Trek. Speaking of which, happy 50th birthday to Star Trek, the original series. Clint is biting his lip.
I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying a word.
He's biting his lip.
Look, you know what? That's really fantastic. That a science fiction show can last that long.
I'll bring up the Xindi. I just got to show you.
Okay, you bring up the Xindi.
You can. It's fascinating to me.
Here's a name I'm going to throw out there.
Yep.
While you're typing away on a Saturday night, surfing the internet,
like we do if we were at home.
Tom DeLonge.
Tom DeLonge,
lead singer of Blink 182.
Right.
Jimmy Church again on Fade to Black. Tom DeLonge started asking the same questions that some people have been asking lately. What's going on in the world? What is this all about? And Tom DeLonge's research led him right smack bang up the upper echelons of the UFO conspiracy. To the point now where 5-star generals are contacting Tom DeLonge and inviting him into briefs because allegedly Tom DeLonge hit the nail right on the head with some of the things he said and some of the things he found out, where 5-star generals have gone, how did you get this information? Where did you get this information from? And what are your sources? So Tom DeLonge's got a book coming out called Secret Machines, where he has heavily written all this kind of stuff. Everything we've just spoken about in this last 10 minutes.
Wow. Okay. Clint doesn't necessarily know. All right, so the different Xindi. Boreals, the humanoids. You have the reptilians, and they actually have insectoids as well.
Right there.
So this is what you get. I mean, science fiction does this stuff all the time. All the time. So ultimately, under the Antarctic, there are supposedly, allegedly cities. They are inhabited. They are technologically well in advance of anything we could possibly have here. Some of those ships tried to escape because there was supposed to be a shift coming and could wipe it out, and they were driven back.
Tom DeLonge, once again, speaks about the exact same thing you're talking about now, and also talks about that these... Okay, so you think about caverns that can hold maybe 10 MCGs.
Yep.
So 10 giant sporting arenas, that size. The walls, how they get a light source in there, Tom DeLonge said, organic plants that give off a bioluminescent glow. You're pointing at me. Go on, say it. Who?
Dr. Richard Alan Miller.
Who was brought in to give expert opinion on how to illuminate such caverns. Can you not see how all the pieces are starting to fall together now?
They're falling into place.
Yeah.
They are falling into place. Well, that's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating, as far as I'm concerned anyway. Hopefully you guys feel the same way. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot to read. Research. We get out there and we look at these things and we're trying to come up with ideas for you, but what you literally need to do is take it and run with it. Do some more. Get on our Facebook page, drop off questions to us, and make sure that...
Facebook page is Beyond3-D.
Yep. Facebook.com Beyond3-D. Leave us questions, leave us queries. We don't mind doing the research. If you don't want to do it, just send us in a direction. We will try our best to get the information for you and present it to you on the show.
If you don't want your home phone ringing at 2 a.m. and then suddenly clicking off, get us to ask the questions.
Very simple. Very simple indeed. Well, that's about it for this week, folks. We have a lot of work to do coming up in the next few weeks. As we said, I want to... And Clint has a lot of... This is cryptozoology and right up his alley. We want to get into a bit of the Nephilim, so we have some more research to do on that, and then we'll present that to you. We have a few guests that I have to sit down with, and the thing about it is we are here in the Southern Hemisphere, and we have to get timings down right to talk to people up in the Northern Hemisphere. So Clint and I will be doing that in the next few weeks as well, and just presenting really good information to you that's pertinent for this day, for this time, for what's going on here and now. And the one thing I would say is, as we present this and we talk about things that have happened in the past and things that can and will more than likely happen in the future, understand that you just have to get yourself right spiritually and the consciousness right, and all will work out for the best. Another presentation that I want to make, and I'm going to really have to work on this, is something else Clint brought up, the Mandela Effect. And it's not just... here in this plane of existence. What they're starting to say now is you are living multiple lives on multiple planets, and there's just a little bit of a degree difference. So we'll have to get into that as well. But a lot to do.
I want to talk soon about what happened in Zimbabwe. 22 years ago. Not tonight. We'll do another show on Zimbabwe, and we'll
Fair
tie
enough.
that into Westall.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh, that's my stomach. I'm hungry.
There you go.
I'm so
There you
hungry.
go. Good enough. Well, guys, thank you for this week. We hope you enjoyed the show. We will come back next week with another edition of Beyond 3D. So, Clint, you have a really good week coming up, and we'll see you later.
You too, Matt, and everybody else, have a fantastic week. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.